My name is Thomas, and I live in River Hollow, a town where time seems to have stopped. Nothing ever changes here. The same houses, the same people, the same slow-paced days. But a few years ago, our quiet world was disrupted by the arrival of Mark Harper. Mark was an outsider, sharply dressed, with a predatory smile that could charm anyone. He quickly amassed wealth by selling his energy drinks. Everywhere you looked, his products were advertised as a new breath of energy. But the truth was far darker. His drinks were deadly. Danny Brock, a young farmer, was the first to die. Then came Henry, a factory worker, a burly man whose strength was legendary. Doctors shrugged their shoulders in confusion, but we, the neighbors, cast wary glances at Mark. His house, with its ominous shed where he brewed his drinks, became a symbol of greed built on the suffering of others. Everything changed when a woman arrived in town. Her name was Lily Warren. She came to Mark's house, holding a boy by the hand. Her son, Ethan, was young, but already blind. Rumor had it he lost his sight after drinking one of Mark's toxic concoctions. Lily banged on Mark's door so loudly that the whole town could hear her cries. "Mark Harper, come out!" she yelled. When Mark finally opened the door, his face was a mask of irritation. "What do you want?" "You poisoned my son!" she screamed. "He'll never see again!" Mark sneered and replied coldly, "You should have watched your kid more carefully, lady." Her face twisted in fury, but then she did something strange. Lily grabbed a lock of his hair and yanked it out with surprising force. "You will pay for this," she said, her voice unnervingly calm. Mark slammed the door, trying to appear unaffected. But just a few days later, strange things began to happen. One evening, I saw thick black smoke billowing from Mark's shed. The smoke was unusual, writhing as if alive, before vanishing into thin air. Later that night, I heard his screams. Looking out the window, I saw Mark standing outside his shed, wildly swinging a knife in the air. "Get away! This is my land!" he yelled into the darkness. At first I thought he was shouting at nothing, but then I saw them, figures emerging one by one from the shadows along the path near his shed. Their faces were gray, disfigured, with hollow eyes. They were the dead. I recognized Danny Brock, the skinny farmer whose body had been found lifeless in his field. Beside him stood Henry, his massive frame now marked with deep scars as if burned by acid. "We've come back, Mark," one of them whispered, his voice carrying a chilling echo. "Back for you." Mark screamed and flailed, but the figures closed in. By sunrise, the dead had vanished, and Mark, panicked, told anyone who would listen that someone was trying to scare him, but no one believed him. A week later, I heard his screams again, but this time they were strange, quiet, broken, as if coming from someone on the brink of total surrender. Peeking out the window, I froze. Mark was on his knees in front of his shed, his back hunched as if under an invisible weight. Above him loomed a shadowy figure cloaked in black, its face hidden in deep shadows. A thick fog coiled around the shed, writhing like a living thing. It crept toward Mark, wrapping around his legs, slithering upward until it ensnared his entire body like a nest of serpents. The air felt dense, oppressive. There was no sound, only Mark's ragged breathing and the faint guttural roar emanating from the heart of the fog. Mark struggled to rise, his movements jerky and desperate, but his legs seemed stuck in some unseen mire. He reached out, grasping for something invisible, but his fingers found only empty air. Suddenly, from within the fog, a skeletal hand emerged. Long, unnaturally thin, with razor-sharp claws. It wrapped around Mark's neck, and he let out a strangled gasp. His head jerked back, as if forced to stare at the heavens. The moonlight illuminated his face, and I saw his eyes. They weren't just wide with fear. They screamed, silently pleading for salvation. But I couldn't move. The fog darkened, thickened, like ink spilling across the earth. It consumed Mark completely. His screams faded into choking gasps, and then silence. When the fog finally dissipated, it was as if nothing had ever been there. The shed stood empty, abandoned, its walls charred and lifeless. On the ground where Mark had been, there was only his hat, soaked with dew, or perhaps something far more sinister and viscous. Mark Harper was gone. Gone as if he had never existed. Morning came, eerily quiet. The usually bustling streets of the village were shrouded in an oppressive stillness. Mark's house stood empty, its windows shut tight, its door ajar as if hastily abandoned. The shed, once alive with activity, now stood like a burnt-out husk, its charred walls exuding an acrid chemical stench. The neighbors quickly noticed his absence, but no one dared to enter his house. "He must have fled," they whispered, though their faces betrayed their fear. Everyone knew Mark wasn't the type to run. A few days later, as the town's murmurs about Mark began to fade, something extraordinary happened. Ethan, Lily's blind son, suddenly regained his sight. That morning, the boy ran out of his house, his eyes wide with wonder and joy. "Mom, I can see! I can see again!" he shouted, arms outstretched as if discovering the world anew. Lily emerged, wrapping him in a tight embrace. She looked serene, even content, though for a fleeting moment I caught a shadow pass over her face, a flicker of something darker. She smiled at the gathering neighbors and said, "It's a miracle. Only God could have restored my boy's sight." But we all knew it wasn't a miracle. Whispers began circulating about Mark's disappearance, about the strange events surrounding Lily and her son. No one dared to speak openly, but the entire town sensed it. Lily had brought something dark into our world, and it had claimed Mark. Some neighbors claimed to feel an unnatural presence lingering in the air. At night, faint whispers could be heard, drifting from the fields or the forest. "It's the souls of those who died because of Mark," an old man muttered when confronted. "They've returned, searching for peace, but peace will never come." When Lily passed by, conversations would halt, replaced by uneasy silence. No one accused her directly, but everyone knew. Something happened that night, something that gave Ethan his sight, but took Mark into the abyss. Though Ethan laughed and played again, his eyes bright with life, River Hollow was never the same. A heavy, haunting presence lingered, as if the darkness had left a permanent scar on the town.